Okay, so I believe the session has started. So welcome. Thank you for attending my session. My name is Julia Amante, and I am a women's fiction author. So what I am going to be talking to fiction writers and memoirists as well, because it applies to you as well. And so what I'm going to talk about are two questions that should be that you should answer as the writer, that you should ask yourself, and that you should answer in your story, both for yourself to clarify what your story is about to yourself and to the reader. Okay, so I am going to share my slides. They are, hopefully I can do this and it won't be too complicated, but I think it'll be helpful to just kind of see what I'm talking about. So we'll quickly go through it. I'm hoping to get through this in about 20 minutes, and that way you have the last 10 minutes to ask some questions of your own. So let's talk about the first. Let me see here. Okay, so the two questions. The first question that you want to make sure that you're answering within your story is the central story question, the central question of your story. So when a reader picks up your book, when they pick up your story, they want the answer to this question. That's the reason why they're reading the book. They look at the story and they want the answer to this question. We'll talk about what it is. In order to be able to answer the central story question of your novel or of your memoir, you need to understand these four things here. Okay, you need to understand the theme of your story. You need to understand the plot of your story. You need to understand who the character is, and you need to understand the goal, the character's goal, the goal that the character has for himself or herself. Okay, so let's look at theme first. And so hopefully you can see the slide just fine, and I'm not seeing any questions or any comments. So I'm just going to continue, and hopefully I can see the questions after. So the theme of your story, you probably remember this from high school, you probably remember, or maybe college, right? Where the professor or the teacher said that every story has a theme. And usually they will say it is, like, for example, love, or this story is about death, or this story is about, it's a coming of age story. And this is good, this is great, right? But that one word, that concept is not the theme. What is it about love, for example, that you are going to share with your reader? So it's not just about love, but maybe it's about how love can be found when you least expect it. Okay, so let's say that you're writing a story about your heroine is maybe in her mid-40s. She's recently divorced or lost her husband. Her children are off doing their own thing. They're grown, and she decides to move to a small little beach community. There's a lot of novels like this where she's going to decide what she wants to do with the second half of her life, and she moves in next door to a neighbor who is maybe kind of grumpy and really doesn't want to have a relationship at all. So they're going to fall in love, right? And the theme of this book is going to be that love can be found when we least expect it. So the reason that you want to have this theme is because your plot has to prove the theme. First of all, it ties it all together, right? So when the reader is reading your story, they know that they don't really realize the theme usually until the end of the story, but your plot is going to prove this theme. Everything that happens in that story is going to be related to proving your theme. So for example, we probably don't want to, we could have a little subplot, but we probably don't want this guy's grown children saying, well, dad's kind of lonely, let's go ahead and move back in with dad. Why? Because it's going to dilute your romantic plot, and it's going to it's going to become a different type of story, right? It's going to be more of a relationship between him and his children rather than between these two people finding love when they weren't expecting it. So you want to make sure that everything that's in there is proving your theme. So theme is the first thing that you want to be clear on. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes when we first start writing, we're not really sure what the theme is going to be, and we're just writing the story. But at some point, you have to realize, what is it that I'm really saying here with this story? Okay. The next thing that you want to be clear on is your plot. Okay, because your plot is going to help you, it's going to prove your theme. So what the central story question, the central question of the story is, the reason that the reader is reading this story is because of your plot. Right, your plot is going to be asking a question. So, will this heroine find love again? Or maybe you're writing like a detective story, right? So, will this detective find the murderer and solve his case? And a lot of times, especially in genre fiction, we already know the answer. Like, we already know that if we're reading a romance, they are going to fall in love. Or we already know that the detective is going to find, or is going to catch the bad guy, right? So a lot of times it's not really is it going to happen? It's more of, how is it going to happen? So the reader is reading your entire book to find out the development of the plot and how you do this. So that's important to understand your plot points, to hopefully, and I've written a lot about this on Medium, that you take some time to actually plot and write an outline of your plot. It doesn't have to be completely really detailed, the plot, but you should know like what your major plot points are going to be and how you're going to get the reader from point A to the end, whatever the last point is. Okay, so the plot is the other thing that you want to make sure you understand. The next thing is the character. You want to make sure that you're really clear on who your character is. And I am actually going to use an example, a memoir. So I don't know if you've read the memoir Educated. I'm also a college professor, so I was really interested in this story because it's a story about a young girl who grows up with an extreme prepper family. They don't believe in a lot of the societal things, so they don't trust the government. They don't send their kids to public schools or any schools. They didn't trust like medical establishments. So she grows up in this very sheltered home, and is taught to read and is taught to do basic math and all of that. But at some point, as she grows older, one of her siblings says, you really should apply to college. You should get educated. And it's really hard for her to do this, but she ends up, applying to some colleges, and she ends up doing this. So it was an interesting story. But what is the central question here of this memoir? And it is, can this happen? Can she do it, right? Can she get educated? Can she leave this family where there was some abuse as well? So one of her older brothers was abusive. Her father was pretty abusive as well. So can she leave this home where she's grown up, where she's knows that she should move on, but she's also kind of scared? Can she do it? And how is she going to be able to do it? This is the central question of the story. In order to know if she's going to be able to do it, it's easy in a memoir because it's her story. But if you're writing a fiction novel, you need to understand the background of your character. How is your character going to make her decisions? How is she going to move on? What's going to be her stumbling blocks? What's going to stop her from reaching her goals? Which is the next thing that you want to make sure that you understand is, what does the character really want? With Educated, what she wants is to get educated, right? But she also wants a few other things. She wants to leave this abusive family. She loves them, but she also knows that she needs to leave them. She also wants to become more independent, and she also needs to face her fears. She's afraid to move on. She's afraid to be independent. So she both wants these goals, but she's also fearful. And so we need to understand what it is exactly that she wants, because once we understand her goals, of course, it makes it a lot easier for us to be able to write our story, because now we know what this character needs, and it will help us with that central story question, right? Because the central story question is basically, is your character going to reach her goals, his goals? Okay, so at some point in my writing career, I knew all this, right? And I was I had all this down. And I would write my novels with making sure I had a real strong central story question, that I understood my characters, I understood all of this. And I still felt like I could do more to make my novel even better, my stories even better. And I wasn't quite sure what, but I knew that there was a deeper question that I needed to answer for my reader, and that I needed to do it in this plot. I needed to do it in this story, and I wasn't quite sure really what to call it or what it was. And I ended up calling it, for me, the significant story question, because it is a significant question for the reader. So where the central story question focuses on the character. Okay, it focuses on what the character wants and if the character is going to reach their goal. And that's what your reader is turning the pages for, right? To see what happens next, to see how this character is going to achieve his goals. But why? Like, why do they care? Why, honestly, does somebody want to read this memoir about this young girl that gets educated? Why do we care? Well, because it's deeper than that. We don't just care if Tara gets educated. It's interesting, but the reason that we really care is because we identify with this character in some way. And that's what you want your reader to do. You want your reader to identify with your character because because of why, right? We don't really know why the reader is identifying. Maybe they identify because they also are struggling with something. And by reading how Tara is able to move ahead, move on with her life, and become educated, how she's able to leave this situation that's unhealthy for her. Maybe it inspires us as the reader to also move on with our life and do something that's important and valuable for us. So we're reading this entire book to maybe get the courage to do it ourselves, right? We may not be in the same situation as Tara, but we are also facing our own struggles. And by reading this book about this girl who struggles and achieves her goals, it inspires us to do the same thing. So the significant story for educated could be something like, how does one become strong enough to leave a situation that is unhealthy? How do we, if we feel trapped on a job or in a relationship, how do we move forward? What are the steps that we need to do in order to be able to move forward? Or what I wrote here on the PowerPoint is maybe simply the question is, how does one reinvent themselves? How do you move and become a new person? Which is another thing, right, that fiction is really great at, is showing us a transformation of the character. And memoirs do the same thing. So the significant story question is really about the reader. It's not, I'm gonna make sure I'm okay on time. The central story question is about the character. Does the character reach their goal? The significant story question is about us. It's about the reader, right? Does this story inspire the reader? What is this story really touching? How is the story touching the reader? Is it teaching the reader something? So it's a little bit deeper. And this is when, at least I found as a reader, when I close a book and I'm still thinking about that book a few days later, or I'm feeling like, wow, that was such an amazing story. It's usually because I have connected with the reader so deeply, and the the story itself has answered a significant question that I had, right? And how does one move forward? How do you find love again? How do you, whatever it might be. So to me, this story, the reason I really enjoyed this story, not as a college professor, I enjoyed it because it was a story about a girl getting educated and going to college, but it was also deeper, right? It's like, how do you face your fears? How do you find a way out of adversity? And her story shows you how that happens, right? So the story itself answers the question, which I think is great when you can do that as a writer, right? Is answer these questions for the reader. Um, so both of these questions, I think, help us as writers and help the reader to have a really clear vision of the story. So a lot of times we are asked as writers, what is your story about? And what do we usually say? We usually answer with the plot. We say, oh, it's a story about a woman who moves in next to a guy at the beach and they fall in love. Okay, but there's a lot of stories like that, right? So what is your story really about? Maybe it's about trusting someone again. Maybe it's about not giving up on love, because and you're never too old, right, to find love. So whatever that significant story question is, that's what your story is really about. It's not really about a woman who moves in next to a guy on the beach and falls in love. That's our plot, but it's not really what our story is about. It's deeper than that, or at least hopefully it is. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Let's see. Stop sharing. There we go. And I don't see any questions, so I'm don't know how to see the questions. Okay, I see people, but I don't see questions. Okay, now I'm seeing some questions. All right. In fact, let me get my glasses so I could actually read the questions. My glasses aren't helping too much. How granular or big picture do you think the central story question is? So the central story question, again, is about the plot. So it's really about how does the character achieve his goal. So how does what can I use that maybe people have seen? Terminator movies. Everybody has seen Terminator movies, maybe. So how does Sarah Connor get away from the Terminator, right? So in that very first Terminator movie, that might be the question. Is like how does she? Well, first of all, she has to go through her own transformation because she's very sort of innocent at the beginning of that movie, and at the end, she's still not that tough character be at the end of the third, I think, Terminator or fourth. I don't remember how many Terminators there are. But even at the end of that first movie, you could see that now she's ready for the challenge, right? She's driving away. She knows there's going to be something horrible that's going to happen, and she's ready to face this. So our central question there is, how is she going to get away from this horrible machine that's chasing her? And what is she going to do to prepare for this war that's coming? And the story answers it. So it's more global, I guess, question about how the character is going to solve their problem. Hopefully that answers that question. Will you share your slides? I would love to share my slides. I'm not quite sure how to do it. I'll find out. If I can't figure out how to do it, I will share it on my Medium page. I can put that up later today so that you can go back and take a look at the slides. I figured that there was a way to do it on here, but I couldn't find a way to do it. Okay. We still have quite a bit of time. Does anybody have any other questions? I don't know if there's a way to refresh the questions, all questions. Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah, there was a way. Do you think it's possible? I don't know if these glasses are helping. Do you think it's possible within to write the chapters or episodes that could then be put into a book on Amazon? Like how Vella has episodes. Do you think it's possible to write the chapters or episodes that could be? Yeah, I think so. So are you saying like writing the outline before you actually write your story? I think it's possible. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but the way that I do it is I try to, do all the things that I just mentioned. So make sure I understand the character, make sure that where this story is going. I usually know more or less. It's after I write my book, I'm really clear on the theme back during my editing stages to make sure that I'm showing this theme in my plot. But I do have my plot points, and I don't use Vellum or any of those other things. I just actually get down on either by hand or I use Microsoft and Word, right? And that's what I use just to make sure that I've got all my plot points down and I know exactly where I'm going with my story. Um, how do you handle the significant story question when the book is a historical fiction, but people know the events? Oh, well, that's a good question. So the book that I just finished writing, it has a lot of historical elements in it. And for example, it starts in the 60s, so assassination of Robert Kennedy, even though people know happened, right? I treat it because it's fiction, right? So the characters don't know what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen. The reader knows what's going to happen, but the characters don't know. So I still, with the significant story question, what you're really looking at is what are you answering for the reader? What is the reader getting from this story? What is it that they're learning, or what is it that they're feeling by the end of your story? So I do the same thing with historical. I'm not a historical writer at all, but this book does go back into the 60s, which I know is not really history, historical in a sense, but it is history. And so the little events that happen don't really affect the significant story question, because the significant story question is more, again, of how is the writer going to feel at the end of the story. What is the story really about? It's not really about the historical events. It's more about probably what happens and how that affects your character, and then how that is going to affect your reader as well. Okay, so it's not the specific events. The specific events can affect the reader, the character, right? But it's the larger story that's going to affect them, not just the events. Okay, and how would you tackle multiple themes when you have several characters? Okay, yeah, so uh, a lot of times we have more than one theme, or a reader will read a story and they will, to them, this book is about this, right? And then another reader will read it and they'll say, well, no, this book is really about something else. And one of the, I think, fun things that I learned when I went back to college and I took classes, right, to get my MFA, and I went to a class with a professor, and he said, once you write your story, once the writer writes their story, it's no longer their story. It now belongs to the reader, and the reader is going to interpret it however they want. And I thought, well, no, I wrote the story. I know what my story is about. But I came to understand that he's right. Each reader is going to have their own interpretation, and there's going to be multiple themes. So even though I think as a writer I'm writing about this theme, there are other themes that I probably unconsciously added to my story, and that you probably do too, or you consciously had a few themes. But usually there's an overarching theme. So I would choose one theme as the writer and say, this is what my book is really about. My book is really about falling in love and trusting, learning to trust again. There are probably other themes in there, or like you're saying, there's other characters that have their own character arc, and they have, their own theme, but there should be an overarching theme that every character proves. So if it's about trust and trusting that you can fall in love again, then each one of those characters should contribute to that larger theme, even though you have other little themes around there too. So there could be other themes about the society, or justice, or whatever it is that you want to add in there, right? So there could be some smaller themes, but I would choose one overarching theme for my entire story. Okay. I think I could take a couple more questions. Preview in the chat. I don't see a separate chat, but let me see if I can again refresh. The questions. How do you write scenes that lay out the theme in a novel in a compelling way? So each one of your themes is, a writer that I love his books, but okay, so Patterson. So if you've read any Patterson books, he has super, super short chapters. and they're almost just one scene. Um, and I love the way that he ends each chapter or each scene. So he ends a chapter almost with a question. So by the time you end that chapter, there's a question that makes you want to go to the next chapter to find out how he answers that question. So either the characters, something's going to happen to the characters, and you're saying, "Wait, how are they going to get out of this?" Right? And okay, so I'm getting a 5-minute warning. Warning. I think that's a great way to end your scenes. Is that it leads to the next scene. So you're ending it with some kind, and by what I mean by question is just something that you're curious about, that the reader is curious about, like how is he going to get away with this, or somebody comes in and there's a surprise, and so you want to move on to the next scene, you want to move on to the next chapter to find out what happens. So that's a great way, the way he does it, to move from scene to scene to scene, because it keeps the reader wanting to find out more. So it never feels like an end, right? And that's always great writing, when you can go from chapter to chapter, and you want to turn the page. You don't really want to put the book down because you're eager to find out what happens next. There's also a scene in sequels, so where you have a scene and something dramatic happens, or there's an action scene. The next scene is going to be more of a sequel, where the character is evaluating what just happened. So he just was in a major car crash, and he's going to be late to his meeting. Things are going to fall apart. The next scene doesn't have to be another action scene. It could be him reevaluating what's going to happen and saying, okay, now what am I going to do? Right. I thought I was going to prove that I was innocent of this murder, and now I found all this evidence that is pointing directly to me. So now he needs to take a break and say, what am I going to do next? How am I going to prove it? And do I need to disappear for a while? Do I need to contact someone? So I like the scene and sequel as well, because it's not just action, 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 action. It gives you an opportunity to see how the character evaluates what he's going to do next, and how he's going to move forward with the plot or the story. Okay, I'm going to try to do one more question. Sometimes it's more interesting when there is a large difference between the characters in the story and the reader in terms of life experiences, background. In science fiction, the contrast then informs the reader about the reader's life, even though the reader is nothing like the sort of reader experiencing every day. Yeah, I think I know what you're saying. So there's a contrast between the reader and what he normally experiences. Yeah, and exactly, in sci-fi, it's not like their normal life, right? They're entering a whole new world, and everything is different. But there are echoes of real life, right? So they're experiencing things that they would normally experience in their life, and they can relate to that. You can still make it so that they're relating to what's happening on the page, because I'm not a science fiction writer again, but for the books that I've read, when I read like about things that are happening or the creatures, I can think of my real life and connect in that way. Okay, so I think I'm about out of time. I might have one more minute. Uh, we're to post fiction on Medium. Any suggestions? Oh yeah, I find that really hard. When Tony was speaking today about fiction, I think it is a lot harder for fiction authors if you're just posting fiction. Most of the stuff that I post is about writing and how to write, because I'm not sure like how to find the readers for fiction unless you're bringing them with you from your books. But I would just post. I would post and then slowly try to grow your readership. And if they're interested, a lot of great writers, actually, Diana Gabaldon started long, long ago by posting little chapters, and that's how her readership grew. And then now if you haven't read her books, she has amazing books, and that's how she started, is just posting scenes and chapters that readers enjoyed. So, if you're a fiction author, I would definitely do that and just slowly start building your readership. Okay, well, thank you all for attending my sessions, and I hope we can keep in touch. So find me on Medium, and let me know if you have any further questions. All right. And I'm going to stay here because I don't know if they actually turn me off or if we move forward somewhere else. All right, I think I just go ahead and leave this session. Okay, so thank you again for joining me. Best of luck with your writing.